Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation. This podcast today is about doing what works. One of the most important decisions you could make in 2021 is to work with some kind of coach or practitioner to optimize or even supercharge your health and wellness. And by doing what works, you work with a coach and you kind of get more of an idea on what does work for your body. I've got a coach on today, in my friend Alex Manos. And on this podcast, we talk testing, where to get tested and how it is effective. We talk about how to find a good coach or practitioner, something I've found quite hard in the past. We talk about the Oura Ring, something which has come up before, and NLP, which is a personal passion of mine, and methylation and homocysteine as well, and loads more as well. Now, please note, a little side note to make you aware of, this was recorded in person before the current COVID restrictions come into force. If I'd recorded it over the last month or so, I would have been breaking the rules, but we weren't, because this was recorded a couple of months ago in much warmer sunshine than you're likely to find in London now, and it was an absolute pleasure to meet Alex in person. Most of these podcasts used to be recorded in person. I've really missed doing that, and so to be able to kind of connect and make better friends with Alex really was great. So here he is, Alex Manos on Zestology. Alex, we're recording. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Tony. Thank you for offering the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously I've been on your podcast before and really enjoyed it. We're huddled around the side of a church in Chiswick, aren't we? To kind of find a place out of the wind, and hopefully it's going to sound okay. It's very hot.
It's really hot. It's good.
By the time this goes out, we'll be wishing that it was hot. You've got your Vivo Barefoots off.
Yeah.
Do you like them?
I love them.
Yeah.
I generally just like being barefoot, so obviously the next best thing.
Yeah. So you're a functional health practitioner. You've got your own testing business. We'll come on to that in a sec. You do NLP as well, but also you're just kind of super into a lot of kind of lifestyle-y biohacking stuff, aren't you?
Yeah.
Like the Vivo Barefoots.
Yeah. I think I'm a pretty big generalist ultimately. And I think it's a useful way to approach health ultimately. I think we can get so bogged down in one area, whether it's our nutrition, our supplement program, our exercise, and ultimately we just need to keep chipping away at all the different areas, I think, and it's that kind of small gains that I think can make a huge difference over a period of time ultimately. So I've always been interested in so many different areas, and I've fought against the advice of specialising in anything, and I enjoy being able to dip my toe in all sorts of different areas.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we had a very might just hold this while we chat. We had a very interesting conversation by email a couple of weeks ago, and I was arguing quite strongly about the benefits of specialising deep in a specific issue, and you're saying you like to do the opposite of that, really.
Yeah, I think it's from a business perspective, and there are going to be instances, I think, where you need the specialist ultimately, but if we take the concept of functional medicine, the whole idea is that all of these systems are interconnected. So if nothing else, I think for the first few years you need to be as broad as possible, and you need to understand how all of these things are interconnected, and then maybe you can start to focus in on one area. But my problem with that, I think, is that then everything just gets your bias, and you get your blinkers on, and everything, you can see everything as SIBO. If you want to see everything as SIBO, you can see everything as potential histamine issue. The symptoms are so diverse in these areas that it's very hard to to not see it as your thing, because that's then becomes our comfort zone ultimately as well.
Yeah. Keeping an open mind is so important in so many areas, and I think people who change and grow and succeed long into their careers and have long careers are those who are able to adapt and move with the times. I mean, who knows what we will know about all sorts of health conditions in 10 years' time that we don't know now.
Yeah.
So, and if you're just sticking to the same old script, it's not going to work, is it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's Dr. Karazian says that if you're looking back 6 months, certainly a year, and you're not thinking, shit, when you look at that client and you go, oh man, I would do that so differently now.
Right.
That's ultimately the rate of science and the rate it's coming out and changing. You've got to have that sort of expectation, and I think it's important to then be transparent with our clients about that. That when we are talking about certain cutting edge pieces of science, let's just take the microbiome for example, it's in its infancy, the research, and we're learning every day new things, and some of them are contradicting what we once thought, and it is important to keep that open mind and just do the best we can with the information that we have now, knowing that it will change. And then applying some of those principles to your own life as well. So you wear the Vivo Barefoots, I've got a pair of them as well. I find them, they're so thin, the sole. For people who don't know, they're kind of barefoot shoes, aren't they? It's like walking around barefoot, very thin soles. I mean, it is extraordinary how there's just no give at all. I've actually got these shoes, which are nice
Ultras. They've also got a very wide toe box. They're 0 drop, but they have a slightly more padded sole. So my kind of wide old paddles fit in them okay. And the theory is that if it's not 0 drop, your heel is above your toes, which is just ludicrous.
Yeah.
It's like wearing high heels. But I just find there's a bit more give in them. I quite like wearing them, striding around the place.
Yeah, it is tricky. Like walking on the path today, you can really feel that heel sort of hit into the concrete. So you've got to be a bit mindful, I think, sometimes.
Yes.
But I've got some Vibrams as well, so that the 5-toe ones, which are the same principle.
Yeah.
But I just find they can get a bit smelly quickly. So
okay, because you don't wear them with socks.
No.
You need foot powder. What about Lems? Have you tried Lems?
No.
They're good. They're very good as well. I've got some at home. If we go back via mine afterwards, I'll show you.
Okay.
They're relatively stylish for this type of shoe, and just slightly thicker soles than the Barefoots, but they work quite well as well.
Nice.
Yeah. What else do you kind of apply to your own life? Are you waking up at dawn and looking at the sun?
That's a really good question. I think my experience has changed. I used to be, in all honesty, the guy that was up at 6 and doing emails at 6:30, and that just worked really well. I'm my most productive in the mornings. I can get a lot done in the first 2 hours, but I was also single at that point in time, and things change. And especially lockdown has been a big lesson for me it's kind of reaffirmed the importance of having a slow start to the day. So more recently I've been waking up whenever I wake up. It's going to be between 6 and 7 still, but there's no alarm, and that almost caused a bit of sort of guilt and uncomfortable feelings of should I not be setting an alarm and getting up and conquering the world, but now it's a bit of a Tim Ferriss thing. So I'll have maybe 5 things, and as long as I'm doing 3 of them, I'm kind of happy and feel good. So breath work will often be there in the morning. Journaling, I'm becoming an increasingly big fan of. Just setting a stopwatch, 15 minutes, freestyle, let it rip. Meditation of some kind, and then either exercise, and then I put kind of cold showers in there, which is more of a daily thing. Yeah. But if I'm doing 2 or 3 of those a day, then I know it's been a good start to the day.
Wow. And is that before you start work?
That's before I start work.
God,
but
I feel inadequate by comparison, Alex. This is terrific.
But it's not that much, and a good point to maybe bring in here is we're all at different stages in our journey. So, if you're used to waking up, having the coffee, and starting work at 6:30, it's just being, I think, compassionate on yourself and starting to make some small changes there. It's been something that I've been sort of mindful of and aware of for years, ultimately. And it doesn't have to be much. I always say to clients, can you do 5 minutes of something in the morning, and just what do you have the capability of, and then give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah, it's really interesting with schedules as well. For me at the moment, I used to pre-kids meditate every morning. At the moment, there's not the time, But there is the time at some point during the day, and actually I'm meditating more than ever. It's just not first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
So being practical around that is great as well.
Yeah.
And like you, I'm much more productive in the morning as the afternoon. So if there's a limited amount of time in the morning, am I going to spend that meditating or am I going to spend that working? But after we finish this, I'm going to head back and do a nice workout in the garden.
Nice.
And it'll be the afternoon, and that'll be a bit. And I've got my work out of the way, interviewed you, and that's all good. So,
perfect.
Yeah. It becomes kind of. It's quite addictive, isn't it? Looking at start searching out those natural highs. Hopefully it's not an addiction, but it is quite addictive searching out those natural highs, especially when you add in a few crazy supplements to the mix.
Yeah, I think it's definitely that you've got to be careful. I see a lot of clients who get so fixated on some of these things, and it's almost there's anxiety about what happens if I don't do some of these things.
Right.
So again, this idea of almost holding everything lightly. When it's going well, awesome. When it's not, that's okay. Let's just relax and sort of regroup when we can.
Yeah.
But I really think that often just giving ourselves that little bit of space. So going to your meditation idea of doing it at any point in the day, but also just the informal meditation. So there's a book, I think it's just called Mindfulness by Jill Hassan.
Right.
And she talks about formal and informal mindfulness, and the informal mindfulness when you're doing the dishes or in the shower.
Yeah.
Can you actually just bring that awareness to whatever it is that you're doing in your routine? And even that is game changing, I think. Because if we're honest, how often when we're in the shower we're thinking, oh, I've got those 10 emails to do afterwards, or I've got to get the kids to school. We're never, or it's rare that I think we're fully present in even those mundane things. Yeah. So I once read an exercise around brushing your teeth and making it a mindfulness practice, and it sounds so silly, but I started to really enjoy brushing my teeth when I started doing that.
I subscribe to Sam Harris's app, and he's very keen to always make the point, look, this is your formal meditation. How can you bring this into little moments into the rest of your day? And one of the quite nice ways we've adapted our meditation practice over the summer is the baby has one nap a day. It's a very good excuse for us to have a yoga nidra every day at the same time.
Lovely.
Normally turns into a sleep, but that's all good. That's what I need, So, I think I'm such a regular theme on this podcast. I know you've spoken about it as well. Is one of the areas that I really struggle is I've got quite an addictive brain. I know that. And I just find technology so addictive. I'm pretty good. I think I'm probably better than most people. And yet still I find it hard not to let it rule my life.
Yeah.
More recently I've been thinking I could definitely do with quite a radical change with how I interact with technology. And I was looking at some of these apps that there's a Freedom. Have you heard of Freedom?
No.
It's an app you download and it'll block various websites and apps. It doesn't work that well. There are ways around it. And then the iPhone has its own settings where you can set, I'm going to have a 10-minute limit on Instagram for the day. And at the end of 10 minutes, it says, your time is up. Would you like more time? I mean, it's useless. It's absolutely useless. You just override it. And of course, I'm not disciplined enough not to override it. Because there'll always be a good excuse. I just wonder if in 10 years' time, we will have an understanding of what a massive problem this is. Because I do still find this a real struggle. Do you?
It is. I do, yeah. I think I would like to think, again, like you, I'm better than most, but there are definitely times where I think I am definitely addicted.
Yeah.
And I'm not, my weakness isn't necessarily scrolling through Instagram and liking things. My addiction is very ego driven. It's basically, has my post got any new traction? How many more likes are there, or how many more downloads of the podcast? Yeah. It's kind of checking stats.
That's the classic intermittent reward system, isn't it?
Yeah.
They don't reward you every time. Sometimes you get loads of likes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't get any.
Yeah, it's infuriating.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my thing. And I've thought to myself a few times, it's nice to kind of give. So obviously, from my social media and the podcast, part of it is just trying to get information out there to people who want it.
Yeah.
Like yours and like everyone doing podcasts. But there's part of me that just thinks, okay, well, there's obviously the business side of it as well. And how much am I and other people profiting from it, not financially but in every sense? And what would happen if I just shut it down, if I just went back to old school in clinics, in clients, and would there be much change? And it feels so liberating to kind of think about it. I don't think I could ever do it though.
Yeah, I know. when I think about true happiness, it's I don't know, being by the sea, hanging out with family, walking to the market in the mall. I mean, you know, whatever it is, it doesn't involve screens. It just doesn't.
No.
You know, we were just on holiday in Greece, and it's just amazing. You know, I was talking a bit about the blue zones, this concept of blue zones where there's an abnormal amount of centenarians, and you can bet your bottom dollar that the things that make them live to 100 are not sitting in a chair with their shoulders hunched looking at a screen. It's, you know, community, it's going for a bloody long walk each morning, lots of exercise, bit of red wine, and some good healthy food.
100%.
Yeah.
So I can think of 4 experiences that were very like that over the last year that have kind of reinforced that for me. So we had a long weekend in Wales a couple of weekends ago. It was me and my wife Katie, and then one colleague, one stranger. And my colleague I've only ever met online.
Sounds an intriguing dynamic. Tell us more.
Well, it was very interesting because me and Katie are pretty big introverts ultimately. Like, we're not the most social. We kind of like our home, etc. And we were like, okay, well let's just go with no expectations. We don't really know one of them at all. The other one Katie didn't know. I've only ever been in communication with online via Skype. So it was curious, but we went there, we got on like a house on fire, and we were on the coast. We were literally 50 metres from the beach. No TV. We shared kind of the cooking responsibilities. It was kind of like communal living. Dips in the ocean, in the cold. It was just divine, really. Lovely. We left there just thinking that was the best 4 days we've had in such a long time. And it was the simplicity of it, and it was the connection of being with like-minded people, having some really great conversations that we were all kind of resonating with, I guess.
Yeah.
And you know, the other experiences were similar to that. A retreat that I did with the London Clinic, the Nutrition Gang. In the beginning of the year, we went to 42 Acres in Somerset.
Oh yeah.
And we did like breath work. There was yoga.
Lovely.
It was just beautiful. And again, so my big message here, I think, is the beauty of those kind of sacred spaces. You know, when you're doing breath work in a group together, like we were saying earlier, there's just something quite magical about it.
Yeah.
And witnessing people be vulnerable and just show up as their true authentic self, whether that's tears or whether that's laughing or anger, you know, just seeing like the genuine human experience that we don't really see day to day that much, I don't think.
No, that's what's so sad about what's going on at the moment, isn't it? You know, I mean, this is the first in-person podcast interview I've done since March.
Wow.
And normally I do about half and half.
Okay.
And it's still very nice connecting with people online, but obviously it's nicer meeting people in person. There's a deeper level of connection and friendship, and it's just better, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's very sad.
And it's so fundamental. Like, I still don't even think I fully appreciate just how important, you know, good human connection is, even with those sort of experiences and what we know in the research now about being lonely and it being an inflammatory state and all this stuff. It does make you very worried about the next year and what lockdown is going to still do to us as a society. Yeah,
I totally agree. I know people who are on their own, it's even harder for them. And I feel very grateful that I've got people to interact with, where I don't have to worry about going into their house. It's a really difficult time, isn't it? And, you know, I was telling you that I did this Qigong class online, and it's been pretty transformational for me. I mean, I do it every day now, pretty much, most days. And I never would have had the chance to do that in person. So there's the benefit of kind of increased digital interaction. But I know that had I given up a week to go and do that with all those other people who did it, it would have been one of the best experiences of my life, rather than just a nice week. So there you go.
Yeah. So Qigong, that's kind of Tai Chi, right? Or
it's linked to Tai Chi. It's the non-martial art form of Tai Chi. Okay. But it's so breath related. I'm sure you'd love it.
Ah, interesting.
And I think there's at least 5,000 different forms of Qigong. Wow. So there's no one right way to do it. And it's just great. It's very nature related. A lot of the moves relate to kind of animal movements. It was developed and honed over thousands of years, and like so many of the things that you and I both talk about on our podcasts, a lot of it has been forgotten over the last 70, 80 years in the pursuit of a kind of more pharmaceutical, less natural approach.
Yeah.
I think you'd love it. It's great, yeah.
I've done 3 Tai Chi classes before, and I instantly loved it.
Did
Just
you?
that kind of that body awareness, that presence.
Yeah.
Again, we were doing it together in a group, but like you said earlier, 7:30 on a Monday evening, it doesn't necessarily work, which is a real shame.
Especially when you're an introvert and you want to be sat in front of Coronation
And getting
Street.
ready for bed, basically. After.
Yeah. I'm interrupting this podcast for one moment because I've got something quite important to tell you. The father of modern medicine was Hippocrates, and I actually went to his birthplace recently. I went to Kos in Greece and went to a Hippocrates museum. It was amazing. I loved it. I thought, I've got to go since I'm into all this health stuff. And he said that all disease begins in your gut. And that is why it's so important, especially during these times, to protect yourself with a boosted immune system. If you drink coffee or tea or smoothies or really any beverage in the morning and you're looking for kind of a nice and tasty way to start your day and defend against harmful bacteria, I've got something for you. And if you're someone who likes to experiment a little bit and try new stuff, you will enjoy this. It is the Ultimate Immunity Protection Stack. And it's been put together by my friends at Bioptimizers, who are my podcast partners for today. And I think it's quite clever of them to do this because, let's be honest, the world isn't in a great place at the moment, and we are all thinking about immunity. So it has 3 products. This immunity stack contains over 18 natural herbs and probiotic blends, and it also contains loads of good stuff they call psychobiotics, which help you with your mood, performance, and cognitive function. So you can head to bioptimizers.com/zestology to find a little bit more about this immunity stack. I'm pleased with it. I think they've done a good job, and I'm really pleased that they're sponsoring this podcast as well. You can use the code ZESTOLOGY10, okay? ZESTOLOGY10 to save an extra 10% on the immunity protection stack. If you're in the UK, go to bioptimizers.co.uk. You won't find that deal or stack anywhere else. And this special deal is only until the end of November. So it's a kind of November special, really. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know how you feel. Time to make like Hippocrates and go and get the old immunity stack, okay? The Ultimate Immunity Protection Stack, bioptimizers.com/zestology. Back to the show. So how long have you been a practitioner for, a functional health practitioner?
Good question. So I started out as a personal trainer, and that would have been in 2006. And then I went immediately into a diploma in nutritional therapy. So I would have graduated from the Institute of Optimum Nutrition in 2009 or 10.
Yeah.
And really, a nutritional therapist is a functional medicine practitioner with just using a different term, I would argue.
Yeah.
And now most nutritional therapy diplomas, to the best of my knowledge, use sort of the functional medicine model as to say they kind of integrate it into their syllabus.
Yeah.
So pretty much a decade I've been doing things like microbiome testing and all that jazz, and working with clients who are struggling in some way with their health and looking for a complementary approach to their treatment.
And I know from having chatted to you today and the last time as well that everybody is different, and yet what is the most common theme that pops up? What is the kind of easiest win that seems to happen the most with people? What are the things that people might just say, okay, straight away, look at the gut, or whatever it might be?
I guess if I answer it from like a body perspective and then from a lifestyle perspective. From a body perspective, I think if you had to say something, it would be the gut. I've got a colleague, Victoria Fenton, in my mind right now, on my shoulder, just waving her finger saying nervous system, nervous system.
Right, yeah.
Because there's an argument definitely for that, because that takes us back to things like the polyvagal theory, things like ultimately stress, anxiety, and the way we're perceiving our environment. Because if we're living in a little fight or flight response for whatever reason, you can't heal in that sort of state, as we all know.
Yeah.
So the nervous system is a huge factor, I think, within healing, health, dis-ease, because obviously it's also regulating all those other systems to some degree. But like we said, I think off air, all the bodily systems are interconnected. So a good example here would be thinking that the gut is the center point of everything, this kind of saying of gut disease starts in the gut. which we know, quite frankly, is actually not necessarily true. A lot of disease might, but we can have digestive issues as a result of something else entirely. And a great example of that is kind of, I guess, female hormones, female health. So people who have undiagnosed PCOS or endometriosis, or a condition whereby actually as part of that condition they have IBS type symptoms, and they might go and initially get diagnosed as IBS. They come to see me thinking that they need to heal their gut, but actually all that stuff is coming from somewhere outside the gut. So it's really tricky, and I think, you know, the further down the rabbit hole you go, the more complex it gets, and that's tricky in its own right. I think, you know, there's bliss in at the beginning of your career when you think, you know, you can go and do your gut stuff, you're working with maybe some easier clients, is my experience, and like you nudge them a little bit, you clean up the diet a bit, you give them a probiotic, and they think you're amazing. And now it's very, very different. And that's, I think, partly, obviously, I think all practitioners, as they get more experience, they have a tendency to get slightly more complex clients because of that. But I also wonder how much of it is sort of just the world and life getting more complex, and more stress, and having to live at a quicker pace, and all these things. Which then takes me back to this idea that if we're not talking about the body, then obviously, you know, stress. If we're not managing that emotional, cognitive side of our well-being, there's no diet, no supplement program, no test is going to help us get any closer to where we want to be.
No, and that goes back to what I was saying. You know, ultimately, it's not just about the addictive nature of social media. It's just living our lives on screens. It's the light that's going into your eyes. It's the sitting in a dark room looking at a screen. I mean, I'm lucky still to be going into the office at Sky, and never have I more appreciated the human interaction in the office. I greet people I haven't seen for the last 6 months like long lost friends, even if I wouldn't have given them a second glance before, and we sit and chat for hours about whatever. Socially distanced, of course, but isn't it nice to just interact with people? You're not doing that if you're working from home.
Definitely. It's so key, and I think sometimes it can be a struggle. Like, I'm not necessarily best in like group settings, for example. I love one-on-one chatting about meaningful, cool stuff. That's kind of where I feel, I guess, most comfortable almost. But yeah, we need it, and I think that takes us back to the nervous system ultimately. So my colleague Victoria had a conversation with her this week, and we were sort of talking about the importance of feeling safe and safety within the context of healing. And you can then branch out into anything. So, you know, do you feel safe around food? Like, how many people have certain anxieties around what happens if I eat this, or I've just got this symptom from this food, what does that mean? There's fundamentally sometimes, I think, a lack of safety even with some of these things that should be so mundane. And I've been there through my own health journey. I think I've said before in the podcast, I remember my young 20s living at home with my parents, and my mum used to just laugh at me because I'd be at the fridge with the door open for 20 minutes trying to understand, what can I eat? Because I'm just going to react to that and that and that. And you get lost. You end up just not knowing what to do. And like walking here, before we sat down and started recording, we were talking about the importance of that sort of practitioner relationship. And that is important. Having someone who's, I think, in some ways gone through it themselves. They get it. They get when you're completely lost and you're not sure what to do. You need someone who can just guide you back to that feeling of safety. And that partly comes from, I think, understanding a little bit about why do we react to so many things. What you talk about in terms of one thing leading to another, that's something I've been looking into a lot recently. I'm very interested in the role that methylation plays, and I haven't really spoken about that enough on the podcast. But I was telling you beforehand that, you know, I don't methylate particularly well, and I'm going to try and explain methylation in a real layman's terms now, totally non-expert, non-endorsed, but it is basically the way that your body processes nutrients, and whether you actually take them all and you get the good benefit of them or not. And if you don't methylate that well, you might not be processing all the food you eat and the nutrients you consume that well, and therefore your body isn't dealing with it, you're not getting rid of the right toxins and that kind of thing. Is that a fairly good description of it? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't do much on the methylation side of things. I sometimes describe it as, you know, a bit of along with other nutrients, a B vitamin dependent process that is involved in the breakdown and the production of lots of different stuff.
Okay.
Including
That's perfect.
neurotransmitters, hormones, lots of things are involved within that. And then obviously you've got your methylation cycle that's connected with other cycles.
Yes.
And you have those diagrams that look like the Olympic rings, which are all sort of interconnected. So then you get into things like ammonia and urea and protein and amino acid stuff, and it becomes a very complex, big topic.
Well, yes, and that's why I think I think there's a link between methylation and histamine for certain.
Yeah.
And this is why it can be complicated and a potentially obsessive quest when you start looking into methylation, trying to understand it. When I first got into methylation, I'd never heard of methylated vitamins, and a practitioner recommended them to me, and I took the kind of highest dose of these vitamins, or the recommended dose, every day for 2 weeks, and I felt unbelievable.
Wow.
I mean, just world beating, like I could have broken the world high jump record, and then had a huge crash and felt genuinely very nauseous and could hardly do anything for 2 months.
Wow.
Which shows that obviously my body was like reacting so well to the methylation that it was too well. And there were like a load of toxins floating around, couldn't get rid of them. So now I tend to take it a lot easier. I mean, this is why it's good to work with a practitioner. So you do that, and then you've also got your own testing company, haven't you?
Yeah. So I sort of co-founded a company called Health Path, and we essentially offer at-home testing that centres really around the gut at the moment. So we've got a sort of a comprehensive stool test that we offer, or 3 different stool tests. We do leaky gut testing, we do SIBO breath testing. What else do we do? We do adrenal testing and food sensitivity testing.
Yeah.
And the idea is you can, like a lot of these other companies out there, you can order the tests, you can do them at home, and then there are some symptom surveys that people fill in around sort of what their most pressing symptoms are, and if they're on any medications, and all the usual things that we'd want to and need to ask about. And then we have practitioners that will go through that symptom survey, go through the results, and give you a bit of an interpretation so you can understand what's going on, and what are some of the things we can do from a lifestyle, nutritional therapy sort of perspective to improve their health. And we've started doing some sort of Q&As on a monthly basis, so people can email in their questions, and then me and my colleague Martin kind of brainstorm some answers. And those have been actually really popular and really enjoyable, because again, I think a lot of people coming to us for, I guess, various reasons aren't able or aren't wanting to work with a practitioner.
Yeah.
But you need it often to some degree. You need some little bit of guidance, and we're doing our best to kind of improve that side of things.
It's very expensive to work with practitioners, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
I've looked more recently in the histamine area, and the world's top practitioners, it's hundreds of pounds per session.
And that's just the consult. So, add any testing, add the supplements that are going to be recommended.
Yeah.
Potential more costs when it comes to food, depending on what the diet's like anyway. And it does very quickly add up. And I think, it's therefore really important to, if you are thinking of working with someone, or even just going your own, trying to understand, okay, what is the long-term investment? There's no point starting if you can't get to the end line, so to speak. So actually, one of the most common questions I do get asked before people start with me is, what are the other costs that I need to be aware of here?
Good, yeah.
And it's a very good question, because there's no point starting, spending £300 maybe on an initial consult with an expert to then realise that, actually I can't continue anyway.
No.
And that's really tricky on every front, because everyone does just want to help ultimately, but it's trying to, I think there's still something out there maybe from like a business model perspective. How can we help more people?
That's kind of what you're looking at with the company.
It is.
You offer the testing, and
we're trying to take away the consult fees to a large degree.
That's great.
So yeah.
And then what about supplements? Personally speaking, what supplements do you take? What are some of the things that you think? It's getting very windy. I hope you can't hear that. I've got my large hairy muff on my podcast, for want of a better word. So hopefully that'll be all right on my microphone. What are some of the supplements that are go-tos for you
personally?
Yeah.
So
potentially with clients as well. Whatever you think people would be interested in.
Yeah. So I kind of rotate quite a lot these days, and I'm actually trying to branch out and try a few new things, but magnesium's a pretty big staple for me and for Katie. I do generally do really well with adaptogens, so ashwagandha, rhodiola being kind of probably the most well-known two. I feel great on adaptogens, and I don't think it's just because obviously we often think about them as a sort of a stress management type supplement, but a lot of them have quite a big role to play within immunity as well, for example. And obviously stress and the immune system are intimately connected anyway. If we think of cortisol being like an anti-inflammatory hormone, immune modulating, etc. So adaptogens are in there.
Just on that theme, I've been getting a lot of questions recently based around stress management, cortisol, adrenals, and I think it ties in with what you were saying earlier. Life is increasingly stressful. It's so. I mean, I don't know about you, but often I have to save my WhatsApp inbox for the end of the day just to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's not work. That's just friend admin. So it's hard to manage one's life, and it is stressful. And a lot of people have been asking me, not really so much about adaptogens, but about CBD.
Oh, okay.
Is that something that you get involved with at all?
To be honest, it's not.
No.
It's and it's something I've been asked a few times, but I've not had an opportunity yet to properly dive into it. But what is interesting is I used to do a little bit of work with a professional athlete, and his sort of strength coach asked me, is CBD something we should be thinking about? And I went on to PubMed, which is obviously their sort of the research database, and there was almost nothing. I couldn't really find any human research showing us that CBD in regards to performance and recovery was a thing, which I think is interesting because obviously it's such a huge thing now, and you've got loads of athletes who are ambassadors for these companies, and it's being pushed amazingly. Now, I will say that anecdotally, you can hear some amazing things in regards to recovery. Pain is another big one where people seem to be getting lots of improvement. But
adaptogens do a good job for you, do they?
Yeah, adaptogens from a immune/stress perspective, a lot of clients have noticed things like really big improvements in sleep.
Do you notice that?
Yes. So I used to get up every night to go for a pee around the same night, and I went on some pretty high dose adaptogens actually.
What brand? Or just were you mixing it all up?
There were two that I used, and to be honest, I'm not going to be able to remember. They were actually off Amazon. It was one of the most popular ones off Amazon.
Okay, so a mixed adaptogen.
It was a single. It was just ashwagandha.
Okay,
and then I used rhodiola, and I actually think that was from Solgar. So really basic, bog standard ones, really. But within, I'll say 2 weeks certainly. I haven't got up to go for a pee since.
Oh my god! I go for a pee every night. I want to stop doing that.
It was a real game changer. So that was amazing.
What was the mechanism at play there?
Well, I think when you look at adaptogens, certainly rhodiola and ashwagandha, there is the immune modulating element. So they have an influence on different components of our immune system. But they're also, ashwagandha can be quite sort of stabilizing and calming, I find. So it probably can help from that perspective. It is influencing and modulating cortisol, so I guess from like a circadian rhythm perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if there's sort of an influence there.
Yeah.
And then you've got kind of, I guess, the Eastern medicine side of stuff as well. So let me see if I can remember this. I think like between 1 and 3 is the liver, isn't it? And I think maybe 3 and 5 the kidneys.
Right, yeah, that's you're getting Qigong territory.
Yeah. I think that might be it. And genetically speaking, I'm genetically predisposed, shall we say, to being a pretty bad phase 2 detoxifier. So that's like a weak link in my chain that I need to be sort of mindful of.
Sounds very technical, but presumably you mean in the middle of the night you can't detox, is that right?
Yeah, so the theory is, certainly with Eastern medicine, is between 1 and 3 is kind of when the liver, I guess, is most active, is the way I understand it. And some of the genes that we know have a role to play within what we call phase 2 detox, which I'll touch on in a second, I'm just bad at, but really simply. And the way I describe this, and is the way it was taught to me initially, is phase 1 detoxification is like you putting your trash at the end of the driveway, and phase 2 is the dustbin men coming along and taking it away. Yeah. So my phase 2, I've just got really lazy dustbin men basically, and I have a tendency to therefore have an accumulation of trash at the end of my driveway, which can be problematic. So thinking about ways how I can support those pathways, and there are 6 or 7 from memory of these pathways, And another way to describe that is like, you know, the slot machines at the arcades, the 2p slot machines. You put your 2p in one of like 6 options, and then it will work its way down. That's kind of how I envision phase 2 detoxification.
Right,
so you need to make sure you've got the right coins going in the right slots to support those pathways. So it may be, from that perspective, the liver was kind of a bit overwhelmed. Which makes sense, because obviously my personal history is a lot of gut stuff in my teens and 20s, and if you've got an unhealthy gut, you've got an unhealthy liver, obviously. So there was probably a connection there as well. But yeah, it was huge for me, and a lot of clients will find adaptogens really
I'm going to try
beneficial.
I think I've got some ashwagandha knocking about somewhere. I think I'm going to try that again.
Yeah, it's definitely...
in the evening or the morning? So you take that in the evening?
I took ashwagandha at each meal.
Each meal?
Yeah, so... and it's interesting, you know Examine.com? So that's a great resource for sort of evidence-based supplementation, basically. They've changed it, actually, understandably, but this was probably 3 years ago when I took the doses that they had on their website, which was like way over what the companies were recommending with their product.
Right.
It was something like 10 times the amount. And that's what worked. But Examine have now changed their recommended dose to often what's on the packaging of these products. So without wanting to give anyone any advice, you know, we can be mindful that you can probably go over what is on the bottle if you've got some sort of ashwagandha or something in the cupboard.
Okay. Yeah. What is one book that you would recommend? Something I ask everyone: one book and one tip for living with more energy and vitality. It might be your favourite book, or it might be just a book that you've read recently and you enjoyed. One book and one tip.
One book. Oh, this is gonna... Okay, I love books. Book for energy and vitality. Okay, without overthinking this, because we'll be here hours, I'm going to go with Mindfulness for Health. And I always forget the author, but it's a blue cover. If you put in Mindfulness for Health in Amazon, it will be the first one.
Yeah.
It is brilliant, and I've seen some remarkable improvements in health with people following it. It's written on the kind of the topic of pain. The two authors had some horrific kind of accidents and things happen that led to chronic pain. But just replace the word pain with any symptom. And I've had clients go through that book with chronic fatigue, with IBS, with fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain sort of condition. And they've had amazing results. And one of the reasons being is you only read a chapter a week. So it's not a book that you're kind of trying to get to the end of before you go to your next book, which sometimes I do. You read a chapter a week. Each chapter comes with a downloadable 10-minute mindfulness meditation. So it becomes like an 8-week, 10-week course in mindfulness. And it's brilliant. And I think sometimes when I reflect on my stuff, I think we're so hyper-stimulated. Most of us are tired because we're just overstimulated. And if we can just detach from screens, and if we can reconnect with ourselves, with the breath, with a candle, if we're doing some sort of mindfulness meditation, if we can just have some breaks, that is hugely energizing.
Yeah.
Because we're just always on, basically.
I know. I mean, even to the extent when you just connect with people. I mean, look, you know, we've just spent a couple of hours in each other's company. We haven't looked at a screen. We've just been chatting. It's more relaxing than the rest of the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just mad, isn't it? I think it is the great health issue of our times, and we're only at the start of understanding that. So that sounds really good, that book. I'll definitely check that out. What about one tip then for living with more energy and vitality? You've obviously been doing this for so many years. I'm very interested to know what you might think might be one thing that people should look at.
It's such a good question. One thing. It probably is that, the whole idea of detaching.
Yeah.
You know, so giving yourself, whatever's possible, so whether it's, you know, a Sunday afternoon where you're not with the phone, you don't watch TV with the family, and you go for a walk in the park, or you play Scrabble, whatever it may be, just get off technology and come into the present, ultimately. Come into your body, come into those relationships, and I think that is probably, for most of us, a big thing.
There's a documentary that I haven't watched on Netflix yet that is all about social media.
Okay.
And it is called The Social something. I've been recommended it quite a few times. It is apparently all about the fairly scary ways that these unbelievably intelligent, talented developers have made social media utterly addictive, and in many cases didn't realise it might be negative as well as positive for us. And one of the things that I've found is, for about the last 5 years, I've been tracking how often I switch off technology, and I try to do it for 2 hours a day. And often, when I started doing this, I'd have 3 or 4 2-hour slots a day where I'd switch technology off, and it's got harder and harder. And I think it's partly because I'm more stimulated than I used to be, and partly because technology, I just use it in every area of my life.
Right.
You know, I mean, if I'm driving to work now, I'll put Waze on, and I need a screen for it. If I need to get in touch with someone, I used to just pick up a phone and call them, and now I'll get on WhatsApp. It's just, you know, screens are so important, aren't they? It worries me that it's so much harder to switch off than it used to be.
Yeah,
but,
and it terrifies me about the younger generations.
I know.
Like, it really worries me. Like, I remember speaking to my sister not that long ago, and
listen to us two old folks.
I know.
Talk about the younger generations. The younger generations.
But this kid, I think it was probably 11, half-hour dentist appointment, comes out and he had 1,000 WhatsApp messages from his friends, and they were things like, you know, where are you? Are you ignoring me? Why haven't you replied? Half an hour. And you just think, how are we meant to manage that? Because it's made even harder by the fact that we didn't have this as kids.
Yeah.
So it's not even like we have our own experience with it at that age.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is, but it's something that we need to address, definitely.
It is, and it's so hard. It is so hard. Your tip is such a good tip, and yet it's so hard to put into action, isn't it?
Yeah.
But probably all the stuff around adaptogens and mindfulness would help. Where can people find out more about you, Alex, about everything you've mentioned and the testing as well?
Yeah, so sort of my website is just alexmanos.co.uk.
Yeah. And your excellent podcast is on there as well.
Yes, it is. So that's just at the Alex Manos podcast, surprisingly. Health Path is just healthpath.com. And we've got loads of pretty cool, I think, blog posts on all sorts of functional medicine, gut-related stuff. So if people are interested, they'll probably really enjoy some of those blogs. I haven't actually written them. We've got some amazing sort of writers and editors who do a lot of that, and I think they've done really great with that stuff. Is there anything else? Those are the big things. I mean, for any practitioners listening, I sort of do a functional medicine mentoring program called the Applied Functional Medicine Mentoring Program. And our website's afmmp.co.uk, and that's a 6-month online program where we kind of mentor practitioners who are looking to master the skills of functional medicine, really. And that's great fun, sort of really trying to enhance that industry within the UK, really, because obviously it's big, but it's kind of bigger in the US, and we need to catch up a little bit, I think.
It's been great to chat. It's quite hot here now, isn't it? So let's switch this off and then go for a stroll.
Sounds good.
And thank you for heading up here, and really great to chat to you.
No, thank you. It's been fun.
Cheers. Thanks to Alex, and if you haven't got an Oura Ring yet, they are good. I mean, there's loads of other trackers there, but I just like the way that the Oura Ring is so effective in tracking heart rate variability, and so on. In the last few months, they've not only announced tie-ups with the NBA and the UFC, but they've now also tied in other sports organisations as well, so really quite impressive. I think there's an NFL franchise that is using them as well, so yeah, really impressive, and I do like the Oura Ring, so it's a nice way to kind of help with your recovery and to learn a little bit more about your body as well. Thanks for listening to Zestology. I'm still down by the river here in West London. It's such a nice place to record podcast intros, and I like to kind of combine my passions of recording this podcast and getting out and about and doing some exercise. If we're going to do both at the same time, then that works for me. And just before I go and enjoy the view on the kind of weak, tepid evening sunset, at this time of year you don't get much in the way of warming sun, but it is beautiful all the same, very crisp down here. My podcast partners today are Magnesium Breakthrough, the most effective magnesium supplement I've ever tried. You can say goodbye to having 7 different bottles of magnesium to get the complete dose, because it's all in Magnesium Breakthrough, and I know this is one of the most popular products that Bioptimizers have, and I know that they are keen on it being a podcast partner of Zestology, because I think it's about the third month this year that Magnesium Breakthrough has been the podcast partner for Zestology, and there's a reason for that, and that's because it's popular, and it's quite easy for me to talk about as well, because, you know, as you know, all the sponsors and the podcast partners that I have on this podcast I use myself, and it makes it quite easy. As I've said before, if McDonald's came along and offered me £1 million to sponsor the podcast, I would say no. But it would be hard. But listen, we're not talking about McDonald's, we're talking about Magnesium Breakthrough, which I do use, and I've used it today already, and so it's a very easy one to talk about. If you want to get involved in the offer, go to biooptimizers.com/Zestology. Use the coupon code Zestology10. You'll actually save up to 40% off some packages, and you're getting the full spectrum and effective magnesium, which you can't really get anywhere else. So it's a real good one. If you're in the UK, head to biooptimizers.co.uk and use the code Zestology10. And if that's ever not clear, send an email and me or one of my team will get back to you. And that makes it sound a bit more grand than it is. It's basically me with a couple of other people who help out occasionally, and Alison, my wonderful producer, and Steve, who edits the podcasts. But if you get in touch, then we will get back to you, and you can send me a message on Instagram or whatever if you're not sure about where to get the discount. But yeah, it's good, it's well worth it, and look, let's be honest, we're all gearing up for a bit of Christmas cheer and festive spirit. So if you can get your nutrition right in the meantime, that's a good idea, right? Okay, next week on Zestology, we will be looking at finding our calm and supercharging our potential. It's been one of my favourite podcasts that I've recorded recently. That is coming up next week. Until then, have a good one. Lockdown restrictions have started to be eased here very slowly. Yeah, and when I say slowly, I mean very slowly. But look, I hope it's all going all right for you, and I'll see you next week.